Well, hello everyone. It is Sunday. I am Kristi. That means it's time for Social Science Sunday. I hope you are all doing well. I want to give a little hello out to the chat before we get started. Hey, Professor Reed and Paul, good to see you. And yeah, let's continue on with our geeky kind of stuff. So just doing a bit of a sound check, making sure y'all can hear me. It sounds maybe a little bit quiet, so I'll turn that up. Hopefully you can't hear my background noise too much. All right, we've got some exciting, nerdy things to talk about today. We're going to talk about ontology. We're going to talk about what exists and how it exists and how it can interact with other things that exist. And that is super fun to me because I'm a nerd. Hey, Transgamer Girl, good to see you as well. I have some slides prepared. I also have a video to look at here from a sociologist who's also talking about social construction of reality. And just to show, like I am not a voice in the wilderness. My opinion is not a minority one in the social sciences when it comes to thinking about what it means to say we're doing social research and on what. It's these are pretty fundamental questions to say what does it mean to say democracy exists? What does it mean to say we have rights? All right, so let's get into this. You ready? I'm ready. I'm so excited. Let me, first I have to put up a window here, get my slides going on, because I've got all kinds of a silly setup here. Yeah, that looks about right. I wonder if can I do a slideshow from the current slide and see how that looks. Now I won't be able to, oh, no, that's not going to work, because it's going to a different screen. Ah, get me out of here. And the slideshow. All right, we're just going to look at it like this. So we'll minimize maybe this. Can we minimize this window? Yeah. And make this a little bit bigger. All right. You guys can all see that, right? Y'all, I should say y'all can all see that. And that's perfect. All right, because I'm in the side and you don't need to see the slide sides. The side slides, the slide sides. Right. Tongue twister Sunday. I'm not quite sure where my pop-up window went, but I'm sure y'all are fine. I'll check in with you as I go along with the lecture. All right. So when we want to do social research. It's not as obvious. So just to recap from last time, what we discussed were some of the foundational ideas in social science research, which means that we want to investigate the social world, right? But what does it mean? What does that mean? What does it mean to investigate the social world? Initially, social researchers were highly influenced from the natural sciences, but the natural sciences, they don't have an ontology problem. They have like an observational problem. It's not that there are new things coming into existence, like new energies and new matter coming into existence. And there might be, but we're not aware of it. There's like a fixed world of stuff to know, we think. And of course, the boundaries of where that goes might continue to expand. But when it comes to separating out oxygen from, hydrogen, for instance, there is a self-organization to the material world that requires less contemplation because it seems to have an independently objective existence relative to our subjective experiences. And therefore, when we do a calculation on, chemical processes and they are stable over time, this gives sort of a weight to the reliability of our perceptions of the external world, right? And as a consequence, natural philosophers weren't really forced to question their construction of their perceptions. Remember, we're talking about a time when, in the Enlightenment, people thought that the mind was a blank slate, and impressions, we got our experiences, sensory perceptions, and whatnot from the physical world, and through that we built knowledge. And what the debate between rationalists and empiricists was: do we primarily get our knowledge from experience, or do we primarily get our knowledge from reason? And one of the important contributions, in my opinion, that Kant made to this whole discussion was, he said, well, hey, wait. The thing about brains and minds is they come preloaded with software. Right? They're not completely unformed. They have some default apps running on them. And as a consequence, we don't build apps in our brain based on our experience. We get these, pre-installed software with our brain, and through those apps, we experience the world. So in some ways, we have to take into account the fact that there is knowledge that is beyond our ken, simply because our brains aren't programmed, our bodies aren't programmed to perceive them without effort. An example of this would be infrared light. And then there are also kinds of forms of knowledge that you can describe it empirically, but you can't understand it necessarily like causally. So there's a logic that underlines geometry. There's a logic that undermines mathematics, balancing both sides of the equation, right? And in these cases, we can know things based on these consistent applications of geometry or whatever else, beyond pure experience. So there are things that we can know about the world that don't come from experience, right? So this is sort of the tension between the empiricists and the rationalists, is how do we develop knowledge? And as, we've kind of going along, like, both. Yes and no, like some things we get from. So, however, if we want to understand the social world, we can't use proofs to explain people. We have to use observations and understand processes based on what we can observe, or we can ask people and they can tell us, to try to understand outcomes. And ultimately, this is what social research does, is it's trying to understand attitudes or outcomes, what people do, think, or say. But to understand the social world means understanding how it exists. And unlike this whole conversation I've just had about the natural world, the social world just doesn't exist like that. So what does it mean to say that things exist? And that's the sort of thing we're going to look at a little bit today. All right, I'm just going to check in the chat. It doesn't seem like I have any audio problems. And it doesn't seem like I've lost anyone quite yet. August says, should a social ontology be able to account for social and natural sciences at the same time, though? I don't think so. Like my position. So the reason, I think the natural sciences do just fine getting on with what they have. I mean, they have, to some extent, not a dissimilar framework. They just won't acknowledge it. Theoretical physics is based on a whole bunch of knowledge. It's built on knowledge of how things work, and then some speculation, and that is more tenuous, I would say, than looking at the way things are socially constructed in the world. And also, social constructionism is acknowledged in the natural sciences by some people who understand philosophy. There's a video that I covered from a physicist talking about the fact that gravity is a social construct, in that we don't really know how gravity works. Like, physicists don't know how gravity works. They have some guesses, right? But when we talk about when they talk about gravity, they're kind of talking about this general idea of what they think it is, not what it really is, right? Because there's a lot of things about gravity they don't understand. No audio problems. Do I need to up my volume a little bit? No audio problems. Put on headphones to hear me properly. I mean, I'm in the yellow. I'm barely in the yellow. I can turn it up a little bit. I don't want people straining, but I also don't want people blown out either. So I've just tweaked, I've put it up a little bit. So in terms of the natural sciences, between their empirics, or their empiricism, and theoretical physics or theoretical mathematics derived from rationalist principles, I think they're fine. Because they're not trying to observe human behavior in the way we are. So, if you're if you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and our goal here as social researchers is to not see every problem through the solution of the method that we are comfortable with. Rather, we should be looking at what questions, how does this question best asked in terms of collecting data, and let the question blast them with sound. Okay. All right. Let's get into ontology, because once you have a clear idea of what you think exists, it then drives everything else about your research. It will tell you what kind of research you think you can even do. Right. So the question of ontology and epistemology together. Hold on, I need a sip of my coffee. Ontology is what exists. Epistemology is how can we know about it. And in our case, we want to know, how does the social world exist? In what way or ways? Once we have formed a conclusion as to what we think exists, then we can apply appropriate methods to try to evaluate our theory or to try to investigate a phenomenon. And this is how we're led by how we think these things exist. So we already did this one. I'm skipping ahead. Okay. What is ontology beyond what exists? From philosophy, and this is from dictionaryreference.com under the definition of ontology, they write that ontology is an explicit, formal specification of how to represent the objects, concepts, and other entities that are assumed to exist in some area of interest and the relationships that hold among them. Then, as an extension of this answer, what exists, we can say, we can ask, what is existence? What does it mean to say something does not exist? What is an object? Can one give an account of what it means to say that an object exists? These aren't easy questions. They're very tenuous ones, which is why they've been discussed for many, many centuries and millennia now. But in terms of in terms of our social research investigation, I think Burr, 2003, provides good clarification in parsing out what we mean by reality, because reality itself is not a self-evident term. Reality, you do have to ask someone, like, what version of reality what definition are you working with here? Because one could mean reality as in truth versus falsehood. What is true about the world is what is real, and things that are not true are not real. So things truth versus falsehood. So you've got, let's say the reality of horses and the falsehood of unicorns. Right? One is true, one is false when describing the world. We can also talk about reality in terms of materiality, physical reality. And this physical reality, like table, like coffee cup, like Kristi's skull, these things are a material reality versus those things which are perhaps illusory. And there is a discussion of, something is real, like people in the transphobic wing of society would say that, the gender binary is real. Now, they could mean any of the three meanings, but one possible interpretation is that they can say that they could be meaning, erroneously, that biological sex has an essence independent of us, in the way that oxygen has an existence independent of us. Of course, we can go back that oxygen is made up a bunch of non-oxygen particles or matter or whatever else, but they can say these things are real versus construction, and things that are constructed are, they might think have less solidity, less reality, less relevance than things that have an essence. And therefore, when we discuss reality, it is important to reflect on which of these three, or perhaps more, assumptions about the word that we're talking about. All right, so we're going to focus here on social phenomenon, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what researchers have already said. Yeah, quarks, exactly, Rory Katz. What researchers have already said about social entities. And then we're going to watch a little in-class video that, again, the sociologist talking about the social construction of reality. So when we talk about social entities, what do we mean by this term, social entities? Well, these are entities that have an external reality to social actors. Okay, so let's take this definition first. A social entity. These are objective entities That's already a loaded term. That have an external reality to social actors. So I'm thinking in terms of social entities, like the law would be an example of something that has a kind of external social reality to me or you, that it kind of exists in the world. And it has an impact on our lives. And, it's independent of our opinion of it, our thinking about it. It is practiced in that sort of collective way that it has an external reality. You can also think about, here, you know what, actually, let me give a better one than law, because law is kind of a social construct. So let's talk about the process of aging as an external reality. And here, by reality, can we go back to the last slide? I guess it was number 8. Oh, where'd that one go? There we go. Here I'm talking about reality as materiality versus illusion. And when I say that objective entities have an external reality to social actors, looking at the process of aging, I am talking about an external force that impacts all people consistently, but I mean, like in terms of everyone is covered. They might not all be experiencing aging in the same way because of intersectionality, but the process of aging, right? This is a better one than law. The process of aging, the biological process of aging, has an external reality to any one individual. So that's, and then we talk about social entities. So we have a biological process of physical change, but then we have, from a sociological point of view, the effects of that on how people behave. And I've pointed to in the past a very obvious thing that as people get older, they report higher attention in politics to health policies and the state of the health service, the NHS or their insurance. And that external process of people caring more about healthcare as a natural consequence to aging is kind of the link that goes between a biological aging and an individual. And this is the social process that kind of like has this consistent effect, even though the outcomes are maybe not the same. And then you have social constructions that are built up from the perceptions and the actions of social actors. An example of this is, all right, let me give something really, really mundane. You walk into a room and the chairs are all set up in such a way that they are in a circle. What impression do you immediately have about the intention of conversations that happen in this space? You walk into the same room the next day and it's set up theater style, with most of the chairs facing in one direction and a podium at the front of the room. What are your expectations about the kinds of human interactions that are going to be taking place in that room? If you think about the way that we operate fluidly in our social environments, we are taught very early on what the expectations are in terms of our roles, whether we're sitting in a circle of chairs or we're sitting in an auditorium, sort of like theater setup. And these natural understandings then feed into the patterns of behavior, because if you behave like you're in a circle setup, when you're in the theater, people are going to get resentful, right? Because everyone else has different expectations. And that social reality doesn't exist magically. It's like when the person walks in the room, they go, magically, we're all going to be in a theater setting. So everyone paying attention to me and y'all shut up and I'll take questions at the end, right? You've got this sort of reality that everyone conforms to almost on an unconscious level, but someone had to create it somewhere at some time, right? So in other words, for the purposes of our class, we say any ontological claims are claims about claims and assumptions that are made about the nature of social reality, claims about what exists, what it looks like, what units make it up, and how these units interact. And there's tension there. And there is a difference in terms of how people think about how the world existing. And again, I'm not interested in getting to a right answer. I'm interested in getting to a complete answer, a valid answer, one that gets us farther into knowledge. And if we have to have multiple modes of data collection, I don't care about that as long as the modes are producing good data. All right, so there's another thing I want to flag up before we move on to the video, which is that there are terms that get changed depending on the authors you're talking, you're reading, or the disciplines you're in, and therefore I want to kind of get a bit of a dictionary. And this slide was more for my students because they had 2 books on the reading list that used the terms differently, and I needed to give them a little like, hey, you're not going crazy, or this, these are not 4 different terms. They're just different ways of talking about the same thing. So in Bryman, he, for instance, uses objectivism and constructionism as the 2 parallel, or not the 2 parallel, the 2 worldviews in tension, or the 2 perspectives. One is like thinks about things as having an objective existence, and the other one looks at it in terms of the construction of social reality, or the construction of reality from an individual. Grix uses the term foundationalism, people who think that there is a core foundation of sort of like a material backing or some kind of essence or something more like that that exists outside of and independent of us. And then there's anti-foundationalism, which maps onto constructionism. And this relates to the idea that, we don't have this core. We all build these things up through our own human interactions and institutions and the norms and practices of a society. Burr talks about social constructionism to refer to a set of approaches to study human behavior. And so when people talk about their ontological positions, just be kind of careful that you don't think that there are more than there. Basically, things really exist outside of our minds, and or most things that are important to human behavior exist independently, objectively somehow, or we think they do. And then there's like, nah, we all participate in creating this world together. You take away human beings, everything disappears. So what do I have here? Foundationalism versus anti-foundationalism, or objectivism and constructionism. Foundationalist or objectivism, reality exists, as I was saying, independent of our knowledge. Here's a quote from Hughes and Sharrock. Quote, "True knowledge must rest upon a set of firm, unquestionable, indisputable truths from which our beliefs may be logically deduced, so retaining the truth value of the foundational premises from which they follow." So you can already see that this has this perspective that our human minds are like these little bubbles floating around in a big bathtub, I guess. And the bathtub is the reality. And all of the little other bubbles are kind of like, in this reality that's set up for us. And our job as bubbles is to do a good job of perceiving that reality as accurately as we can. And then from this accurate understanding or knowledge or observation, we can start to logically deduce things about the bathtub that we're in as this bubble. And the value or the truth value of our statements are going to be judged according to, on quality, according to how well they map onto that reality. So that's the sort of like where each bubble's in a bathtub analogy that I just made up. I'm going to see if I can carry this over. All right, and then the social phenomenon, the other side. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Let me just finish this up. Social phenomenon and their meaning have existence independent of social actors. Now, if we want to say social phenomenon can like exist independent of social actors, maybe there's a little bit like, I could maybe see some, but if it's also meaning. And you have to ask yourself, can meaning have an existence independent of social actors? But that is a more foundationalist approach. And when you do quantitative political science, you're assuming this kind of relationship because it's mirroring the natural sciences. And so when I go out and I do a survey and I ask someone, what is the strength of your party identification? Then my assumption is that party identification strength is going to be like emotion is going to push them. It has almost like an independent existence that helps helps drive their behavior. And if I know it accurately, then I can predict their behavior because that measure is independent. Right? It's not socially constructed between actors. We treat it as if they are forces of nature. We treat them as if they have the same kind of causal relationship as material objects do. That's the foundational assumption. That is the foundationalism of quantitative social science. And that is why you end up being able to do mathematics and statistical inferences, because you're building on this whole system that assumes things have a reality and that there are causal relationships in the world independent of us. And that's what you're interested in understanding. Now, does that make sense? I hope it is. I hope it does. If you don't, I do have your things here in the chat I have in the window, so you can drop questions. That is foundationalism. Anti-foundationalism, or constructivism, is the approach that you don't think the world exists independent of our knowledge of it. So reality isn't out there. Party identification isn't like an emotion floating around in the universe and we just tap into it and then it drives our behavior. Our reality is socially constructed by ourselves. We decide how we're going to interpret or react to or adopt certain practices. And it's through our practice of adopting them and engaging with them and acting on them that reality continues. From this perspective, there are no central values that can be rationally and universally grounded, because there is no objective existence to ground them in for the purposes of human socially constructed reality. And this is, I guess, you know what I say, is a postmodern kind of view, but yeah, it's the idea that there are, like, murder is wrong because we've decided as a society it's wrong, not because if you remove all human beings from the universe, murder is still wrong. There isn't an eternal murder is wrongness category in the universe that exists before humans came into existence as we know them, and will continue to persist after human beings go out. We wipe ourselves out as a species. Murder is a epiphenomenal, like, for the existence of human civilization. It's a norm that popped up as a consequence of humans' need to live in societies, not because it's got an objective truth value. And this is where Jordan Peterson's brain just sort of explodes, because I think their opinion is things that are not objectively true are less valuable than things that humans generate, things that are socially constructed. I would argue the opposite. I would say that the idea that we can impute our morality on an objective truth is merely an attempt by those who don't understand to assign a validity to a moral position like murder that they think is lacking from merely human authority, from the rightness or the wrongness of the action. And I think where we actually get the power for saying murder is wrong is not by appealing to a non-existent thing outside of our minds. It's by appealing to that emotional core that most people, maybe not sociopaths or psychopaths, are capable of experiencing, but the empathy of when someone loses someone they love. And when that is then done deliberately, the grief, like, that's what drives the moral underpinning. It's the empathy, and that's where the moral strength of the argument comes from, through the construction of that value between human beings, because we value human life, put into tension with lots of other things like euthanasia and abortion and stuff. But fundamentally, the reason why murder is wrong has value is because it has value to us subjectively. We don't do it because of an outside force in the universe that's telling us what's right and wrong. And so when you look at the world from that way, you realize that, we're, I don't know if I can do the bubble one still so much anymore, but it maybe in that we're all like constantly re-upping our bubbles. Like, we're all participating in adding more detergent to the bubble to reshape it or change the color or change the size, because social reality isn't fixed. It isn't consistent over time. It's got plasticity. It can be changed. And when you realize that you're not going for an objective truth, that's a fool's folly, as it were, that it's not your job as a researcher to discover something outside that has a universal, consistent, objective truth to it, and then report that accurately, which was our assumption before, right? Go out into the world, be accurate as you can, and from that accuracy, your truth value increases. Here, truth value increases from understanding that anyone is always presenting a specific version of social reality. No one has access to social reality. We all have access to our experiences or knowledge of or interactions with the social reality that we have or we operate within. And as a consequence, because everyone has a little piece of it, no one can own it. No one can say, my truth is the truth. Again, Jordan Peterson's mind explodes at this point. And because the reason why you can't say this truth is the truth is because the truth isn't located outside of anything. It's located in a bunch of people, and their opinions can change, and their things can change over time. So social reality is a process, not a point, a fixed point. It's an ongoing thing. It's like watching a waterfall, right? You can't say one moment of time in a waterfall is this is when the waterfall is a waterfall. You can't point to a specific point in the waterfall and say this is the essence of a waterfall. You have to realize that there's a whole process of rain and water collecting and gravity and, geography. All these things have to kind of come together, and they're all changing. Weather's changing. The geology or geography is changing. The wind has so it's not it's not about capturing a truth. It's about understanding that there is a process. All right. Born Jordan. All right. Can I just get a little check in the chat? Because I'm wondering if what I'm saying to you is at all new. So let's just take a little. We've been going for like 30 minutes now. I want to do a little bit more interactive stuff, and I wanted to spend more time with this idea of the ontology of social reality because I didn't get to do it in my classes, and I'm wondering what kinds of things do you find this useful? So I'm not looking for validation so much as, do you feel like this is something that you've heard people talk about before? Is this something that you haven't really heard someone process through before? If you could just take a little time and write in the chat a little like how you're receiving this information. Is this interesting to you or whatever else? So I'm gonna give you a little chance to do that. I'll read out some comments to see until you can get a few more comments here. But, all right. So Mark asks, is foundationalism the working assumption of the hard sciences? I would say the natural sciences, because it's actually harder to do social science, I think, than natural sciences. And yes, I would say, I would say maybe more on the atomic level. There is a question in the natural sciences. It's not quite the same. It's not quite as ephemeral. It's not quite as squishy as we have it in the social sciences. But in the natural sciences, they do have a sort of pre-quantum view of the world. And that was very deterministic. It was, Einstein's quote, God does not play dice, or does not, whatever that was about the dice in the universe, that things are certain. And there was a lot of comfort, I think, people took before quantum physics, and this idea that the universe was like a clock or it was like a machine, and you just, like you wind it up and you know what goes into it, and then you can know things for certain about it, which is really special. Human beings have this ability to develop knowledge and certainty that other animals don't. But then quantum reality came along, and people had a sort of block. They didn't want to, they were resistant to quantum physics, not only because it was a new discipline, but also because it challenged that determinism. And it put the foundation of the universe not on nice, certain, core, grounded, safe physical processes. Now, the base core of the universe is probability. It's odds ratios. It could be this or it could be this. And that feels a lot less certain than E equals mc squared, right? You have to be a bit more flexible and more more humble in your understandings and be led that way. So I think there's still, I mean, quarks are still quarks and energy is still energy. But I think that, so in that way, it is still foundational, it is still objective, but I do think that quantum physics was a good humbling for the natural sciences, and that you shouldn't over-egg the pudding when it comes to declaring you know things about the nature of reality, because it'll pull the rug out from underneath you. So I would say that's a very long answer to say generally yes. Generally, yes, foundationalism or an external, independent reality, independent of mind, is very much. And from it makes a lot of sense from that too, right? We're not talking about investigating democracy. We're talking about, investigating black holes. And there's a better ontological argument for the existence of those types of phenomenon objectively and independently. All right. Well, what else do we say? I guess I would call that more the Hobbesian view than a postmodern. If the connection you were making about, I don't know about murder. Sorry, I don't. And Hobbes was definitely like he was. Not a constructivist. He didn't exist at his time. I have a lot of time for Hobbes. I think he had he did some very good, clear thinking. But I don't know what we're talking about here with the murder. 8 Decay says, so the constructivist isn't interested in laws of physics like gravity or whatnot, but maybe about the implications of that. Yeah, that's kind of close. So what I would say is when I do a constructivist piece of research, I'm not interested, this is, look at the methods that you use. You use qualitative methods, you use induction, you use open coding, and you're data-led. So the idea of a constructivist point of view when you're going into a new area or you're investigating a social phenomenon, maybe in a different time or place or whatever else, is that you want to get a good understanding of how people understand things. And so as a consequence, you're not looking, your investigation is about concluding maybe patterns or groups of concepts that tend to hang together. And you can't, like even with let's say my qualitative election study of Britain, I've found multiple times that if you ask people about party leaders now in elections going back to 2010, and then you look at the phrases they use, if you cluster them together by the value that underpins the way that they talk about politicians, you fundamentally can categorize people's evaluations into trustworthiness, the personality of the politician, and their leadership qualities. Again and again and again. And what you find is the person who ends up winning the party in power is the person who doesn't have the best trustworthiness or even the best personality, but they do end up in the aggregate scoring higher than the other political leaders on leadership. Now, can I say can I take my qualitative findings and say definitively that is how people evaluate leaders? No, because I'm still working with an inductive process. So in order to turn that into a claim about how a causal mechanism works, or to make a declaration about how people categorize, how we can categorize the things that people are evaluating leaders on, I would need to create a theory that is deductive and then go use survey data and test my theory out. But that inductive part is understanding the processes at work, that first part of it. So it's not so much that it's not so much about the physics. I mean, constructivism, I think, is pretty much just down to understanding human behavior. But the perspective is you go data-led, and then from those inferences or logical deductions, you can turn those into theories that can be tested quantitatively. All right. Intro to sociology, cool. I usually hang out with cosplay people. Okay, cool. Not new to y'all. Okay, all right. So I wish I'd had this kind of explanation of social science in the 80s. Yeah, and this is kind of what I did it. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Paul, thank you. You did your degree and master's in philosophy. My explanations are super. You have no idea how in sort of like insecure I feel as an amateur philosopher. So that validation makes me feel very good. That's why I'm always like, this is what I think about the world, because I can't really declare everyone. All right, let me just go ahead and see if there's any. All right. The other thing I want to say before we move on to the video is the social world, I don't think people understand we don't know how to see the social world. We don't have, it's not visible to us in the way that light is, or color, or the solidity of objects. However, your life, the social constructs will shape your life and can be life or death. And I did take this, I had this for my students way back in the day. It's from a really old Onion article. I don't even know what year this is anymore. But I guess it's old enough where Bernanke was the Fed chair. And it's funny because it's true. Right, I'll read this out. The U.S. Oh, hold on, I have to move this over a bit. The U.S. economy grinds to a halt as nation realizes money just a symbolic, mutually shared illusion. Money is a social construct. It is like probably like one of the most definitively influential social constructs globally throughout history, consistently. But it doesn't have any existence outside of what we agree it has. So the article says the U.S. economy ceased to function this week after unexpected existential remarks by Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke shocked Americans into realizing that money is, in fact, just a meaningless and intangible social construct. Quote, though raising interest rates is unlikely at the moment, the Fed will, of course, act appropriately if we, said Bernanke, who then paused for a moment, looked down at his prepared statement, and shook his head in utter disbelief. Quote, you know what? It doesn't matter. None of this so-called money really matters at all. It's just an illusion, said a wide-eyed Bernanke as he removed bills from his wallet and slowly spread them out before him. Just look at it. Meaningless pieces of paper with numbers printed on them. Worthless. Yeah. And yet the entire global economy operates on a social construct. The entire global economy depends on us all buying into the social construction of reality of an economy. All right. So, last comment. So, get the data, investigate it for connections, and form a theory and test the theory. Yes, A to the K. I would put this in the abduction sort of cycle, which I get onto in a later slide. But the idea is you have a deductive approach to the social research, which is you take a theory and you make a prediction as to how the world should look if your theory is correct. You make it falsifiable, you get your data, you test your theory, you look at the results, and you draw conclusions based on socially accepted conventions for what is statistically significant and what is not. And then based on that, you make claims about reality. But how do you get theories? Well, you get theories by going into the world and shutting your mouth and just looking at things and watching and asking questions when it is time to open your mouth and asking questions about the thing and being open to understanding processes that you might not have been paying attention to before. And through that, you get new information, which you then try to figure out, okay, how does this operate? And then not all qualitative research is designed to be tested qualitatively. Market research, for instance, you're just getting people's opinions on what color, they like to see on their detergent boxes. You don't need to quantitatively test that so much. But when you want to talk about processes, you can't, you can get theories about the world from one of two ways, right? And this is my, how I feel about the quants approach to this, right? I have a lot of time for quants. I love quants. I do quants, right? I publish in quants. But when you want to do theory development, you can either sit in your chair on your butt and just guess, which is what, a lot of previous researchers have done, and it's smuggled in all kinds of sexism and racism with that speculation of how the world works, because they're smuggling in values at the same time they're analyzing processes. Or, this is what I prefer, you can go talk to people. You can go, open your mouth to ask them questions and then shut up and let them talk. And you do that enough times, you start to see patterns. And the idea in qualitative research is, I think it's like theoretical exhaustion or theoretical saturation. And that's when you want to investigate a phenomenon and you talk to people about it and you get like a perspective, and you go talk to someone else and you get a different perspective, and you go to talk to someone else and you get kind of a mix of the two, and then you keep going until you don't hear anything new on that topic. And when you're on your 50th interview or your 27th interview or your 1000th interview, whatever it takes, and you're not hearing anything new, you're not hearing any new ideas or language or something that you hadn't heard before, that's when you know you've reached theoretical saturation. That's the point where, okay, I got everything I need now. I can think about what all this means. All right, let's have a little lesson. I think I'm going to have to put my headphones on now. We're going to have, oh gosh, I really do natter on. We're going to watch this video. It's going to be the end. And thanks A to the K. I'm glad that you're in following my explanations, because I feel like a lot of the problems with people's lack of respect or understanding for the social sciences comes primarily from the fact they don't really understand what we do. And they tend to think that we're like the poor man's version of the natural sciences. And we have our, like, oh, well, you can't, there isn't a grand theory of everything in the social sciences. Or, you can't measure everything with quantitatively. Like, well, yeah, well, like, you don't ask fish to fly. You ask how well they do in the waters that they live in, Anyway, you guys have heard my rant about that before. So let me test this out. Should be, I think I might have to just check my desktop. Hold on. Yep, desktop audio. You'll get to see behind the curtain. How exciting. Okay, yeah, that's it. Let's have a listen, see if this works. All right, it seems to be working.
Social construction.
All right, is that too loud for everyone in the chat relative to me? No, it looks like we're about the same on the peak. So I will move over a bit. If it's too loud, scream in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to hit play. And I'll go back 5 seconds. All right. Oh, I'll move myself.
The social construction of reality is a core concept in sociology, one that unnerves Christians probably more than any other. What does it mean? The social construction of reality refers to the process whereby people continuously create, through their actions and interactions, a shared reality that is experienced as objectively factual and subjectively meaningful.
Now, this is a good definition, and the reason I didn't put it in my slides is because he is going to do it, so I didn't want to take his thunder. But this is a part that I probably did not emphasize enough about the social construction of reality, even though I've implied it based on the language I've used. And that is the thing about something like money. I don't have any money on me, but let's pretend this handkerchief is money. We have an economy. We get paid, our currency, our money has value, right? And we treat, let's say that this is like my euro note. We treat this euro note as if it's objectively factual, right? That 5 euros somehow has a 5 euro-ness to it, or $5-ness to it, that is held in this document, right? Held in this piece of paper. And by treating the subjective as objective, it becomes it seems more solid. We tend to over solidify social reality, and so it has this. It's experienced as objectively factual, and I don't want to just say it's like it's entirely an illusion, because by agreeing that it's objectively factual, we make it objectively factual. Right. We have, let's say, like an incarceration process, right? A whole prison system where people are expected to comply. Like if you commit a crime and you're taken through this process that everybody else sees as legitimate, even if it's not considered legitimate, but let's say it's considered legitimate in the Western democracy or Western societies, or in democratic societies, not just Western, democratic societies. You have a process, you have a rule of law, and you are found guilty, objectively guilty, then we will physically take you and put you in a cell. That's objectively factual. The idea of guilt isn't. The idea of rule of law isn't. The idea of guilt or innocence isn't objectively factual, but the experiences of you being detained and having to pay, all those things are objectively factual. And I think that's kind of where the slide between how does a social reality map onto a material reality. That's kind of a good, at least seems to me, that difficult point. How do you thread that needle of understanding what is and isn't material existence when they're so bound up? Another element of the social construction of reality is that it has to have subjective meaning. If it has no meaning, then it's like, I'm trying to think of a part of objective reality, or I'm sorry, not objective. I'm trying to think of a part of social construction of reality that doesn't really have some kind of a norm to it. The law does, government processes do, religions are entirely socially constructed and values based. So it seems to me, I mean, I haven't thought about this too deeply, but is it possible to have something socially constructive that is divorced from meaning? I'm asking, I don't have an answer, but it's an interesting question. I'm not saying things that are morally neutral. I'm saying things that are not meaningful. Something can be neutral and have meaning, but something that is subjectively meaningless to any particular person, can that, or to a society, be part of social reality? I don't know. Interesting question. But let's just take this definition. So it has to be experienced. Not that it is objectively factual. It is experienced as objectively factual and subjectively meaningful.
In other words, the social world is not simply given, it is not natural, it is not revealed, it is not even fully determined. It's made and made up by people. It is transmitted by people. What we have not learned from our own senses, our own intuition, or our own reason, we have learned directly from other human beings.
Now let's think about this. This is like deep stuff, but how much of your knowledge and understanding about the world actually comes from your direct experience of it? And how much of it comes from other people relating things about it that they say are accurate? Most knowledge that we obtain, we don't get from direct sensory experience. We get from other human beings. And so I think that is worth, when we talk about empiricism and this whole idea about, the sensory perception and tabula rasa, and we learn through experiences. Fact is, most knowledge is mediated through a social process. Things are filtered out of that social process. Homeschooling, you don't get a complete education if you're homeschooled in America. And so that social reality, too, determines what you're knowing as objective reality, which is how you control, populations. So I'm just adding on to that. What is A to the K saying? When they were explaining the concept of currency the first time, people must have looked at them with the way people look at us when we say it's a social construct. What do you mean? I turn in this piece of copper and I get a chicken for it. What do you mean? Yeah. And at this point, money isn't even linked to physical objects anymore. It's completely done on faith. But anyway.
So 95% of what we know, we have simply accepted from what other people have told us.
This is just let that sink in for a second. That, with all this talk about discussions of empiricism and direct sensory perception, most of us just learn from the societies in which we're born. So, and that means humans are always mediating our knowledge. It's not a direct understanding, it's not a direct experience of the truth of reality, right? We're just having it mediated.
Even what our own senses and intuition and reason tell us is highly shaped by what other people have told us.
Think about the fact that, in some cultures you have multiple words for snow. In other cultures, you have multiple colors for green or whatever else, right? The possibility of what exists is defined initially to a person by the world they're born into. And this is when I point to the problems I have. I think the Bible, for instance, is incredibly toxic and harmful for human beings, especially for men, because there is simply not even a possible existence for male victims of abuse in those texts. When there is assault discussed, it's always framed in a cis woman's body or a cis girl's body. So you can't even exist as a victim if you're not in a cis woman's body in that worldview. And so, when people say, objective reality, that whole objective reality is initially mediated by people's subjective understandings and their linguistic frameworks. So you start to see how the whole objective reality perception starts to break down because we're filtering it through our own, brains that have preset apps on them, and then we're located in a society that already has laid out what can and can't exist linguistically, and then you want to tell me through these problematic or flawed, it's okay to be flawed, these flawed processes, I can get to objective truth? Okay. The difference between the word cow and beef, because of who was speaking. Yeah, there's also, like deer and venison and pork and so forth. Anyway, we're just going to get on with this because I've got about 3 minutes left and I've got to wrap up the show.
For example, what counts as reason? The social world could therefore be otherwise. It could be altered. The social reality in which humans live is not inevitable. It is not natural. Mm-hmm. It can be scary to ponder the possibility that our reality isn't real, but it can also be liberating. We can literally change the world. It can be deconstructed and reconstructed as it has been continuously throughout history.
All right, because we're running out of time. Why do you ride like you're running out of time? we're gonna hold it there. I will, though, put this link in the chat. You can go and watch more of this afterwards. I'm not quite sure what we'll do next week, but what I really wanted to get across today is just this notion that is to get you thinking deeper about what exists and why it exists. And also, you can see why this is very threatening to Jordan Peterson types or the Ben Shapiro types. He mentioned at Dennis mentioned here at the start that I know him for Dr. Hebert, that Christians, don't like this because it makes their claims of power which they makes the power claims upon things that they say give them power, objective truth, God, right? I can't put together sentences today. But if you say that there isn't an objective truth that they have special access to, that God gave them, that is independent and is above human opinion, so, people who disagree with them, if they can't appeal to authority to crush opposition and free thought, then they have to stand on their own merits. And they can't. In the modern society, you can't. So, people like Peterson, people like Ben Shapiro, any of the right-wing people, find this idea of social reality being so malleable and unreliable without foundation to be very unsettling. Because if you think that you have God-given powers because you pee standing up, and this gives you the right to beat down on other people and make them do stuff for you, and then someone says, that's a load of crap. You're, just because you pee standing up, that doesn't make you special. And in fact, what you're doing is completely without merit, and your whole value system sucks. And we need to destroy that value system that gives you power and status and authority and the ability to get away with things. Well, obviously, they're invested in protecting that power. All right. That's all we have time for today, because I do want to keep these to an hour. I probably should keep them to half an hour if I wanted to get the view counts up, but that's all right. I'm here for people here who are really nerdy and want to dig into it. So, I'm really glad for the opportunity to get deeper into these philosophical things, because when I was doing my lectures in a classroom, I get 1 hour of lecture and 1 hour seminar, and then we got to run. And there's so much here that really gives you a better appreciation for the challenges of social research and the insights and the possibilities for social research. If you understand that society isn't a given, that values aren't beyond our ability to engage with and transform and progress on. So it's really important, in my opinion, but I would think that because I'm a social scientist. Right. I think that is it. I want to thank you, everyone, for taking the time. What's this, Easy 7? Got a little deep here, but I feel like we can still go deeper. Absolutely. Let's see. I like the introduction, but I thought it was too anthropomorphic. Maybe that's more immediate. Yeah, go check out the rest of the video. I don't know if you mean the my introduction or his introduction or whatever. Yeah, you could do an entire philosophy. I mean, you could spend like the equivalent of a philosophy course on ontology and epistemology, and so we'll see where we go next time. What I didn't get a chance to talk to, and maybe we will, is a living example of how social reality, the construction of social reality, it has such an objective, independent effect on lives. And I was going to point to the light of Alexander Hamilton, because we have a hard time today understanding why did he do that duel. And it's because we don't live in the same social reality he does. So maybe I'll get to that next week. I don't know. But whatever I decide to natter on about for 60 minutes, I will be back here next Sunday. And hopefully you will too. So thank you everyone in the chat for stopping by and being nerdy with me. I appreciate your time and attention as always. And until next time. Ooh, it's raining out. I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. Have a wonderful Sunday. Wherever it is, whenever it is you are, stay happy, stay safe, and stay healthy. Okay.